Carlos ADAMES versus Hamzah SHEERAZ. In a nutshell, I did feel that ADAMES successfully defended his belt versus SHEERAZ. I do agree with Frank Warren, SHEERAZ's promoter. He said that Hamzah was lucky to get a draw. 100%. I agree with that. I do not feel that SHEERAZ displayed enough effective aggression over the majority of the rounds in order to justify even a draw, or certainly not a win. The most disappointing aspect of SHEERAZ getting the draw is that he was actually capable of doing or performing at much higher level than he showed through the majority of the time in the ring. For example, for about a 98% of that entire 12 rounds, SHEERAZ just resorted to a double high guard, shelling up and standing there waiting for ADAMES to finish his volley of punches before SHEERAZ would initiate something. However, he didn't resort to that because that's all he's capable of. There were moments in that fight where SHEERAZ showed absolutely high-level, brilliant defensive maneuvers. For example, in the later rounds, I noticed that he slipped a punch very closely and came back with counter shots. Well, somebody who's capable of that should have been doing that far more frequently throughout the fight, not just shelling up. Second thing he did, probably in one of the middle rounds, was he did a weave underneath a punch and then pivoted out. Again, a highly advanced defensive move. So why didn't SHEERAZ employ that for more of the fight? By simply using that double high guard and shelling up. Fine, you're not getting hit perhaps by the other fighter, but you are also not in a good position to see what's going on, to see the counter shot, and to get your shots off. You're simply 100% defensive when you shell up like he did. Of course, it's far riskier to slip and counter, to weave under, pivot and counter, but these are the expectations for someone who's challenging for a world championship fight. That's my first criticism of SHEERAZ in that particular performance, is that persistent double high guard shelling up defense. My second criticism of SHEERAZ is the fact that he constantly crossed his legs when he moved to his left. Now, he didn't cross his right over his left, he crossed his left foot behind his right foot. An absolute no-no. That's a habit that should have been corrected long ago during a training camp. I would not even tolerate that habit from an amateur fighter heading into their amateur debut. There are most certainly footwork drills you can do to get that habit out of a fighter. They also need to be constantly reminded that they're crossing their legs. If they do that in a live sparring session, you need to stop them, make them aware of the fact that you just crossed your left foot behind your right foot. When you're moving to your right, stop doing that. Alternatively, you can also tell that fighter, hey, go to your left, but then go to your right, and then go back to your left again. That way they'll get a little more adept with their footwork. Now, again, this is something that SHEERAZ showed in moments in the later rounds of the fight. He started using very smooth side-to-side movement instead of always going consistently to his left. So again, why was that not brought out of him in the earlier rounds? Now, I do understand that apparently SHEERAZ broke his left hand apparently in 3 places, somewhere around the 4th or 5th round. But regardless, that still does not answer the question as to, before he broke his hand in the early rounds, why was he constantly crossing his left foot behind his right foot? Regarding Hamzah's performance versus Carlos, he persistently used only a single jab for much of that fight. I mean, I think I counted 1 double jab in the 2nd round and 1 double jab in the 3rd round, or something like that. But again, that's a very basic flaw. Fighters should not ever throw the single jab. That is another habit that should be trained out of a fighter during the camp. That's a habit that should have been addressed several fights ago, perhaps when Hamzah was starting out his professional career. He should have been told, under pain of death, shall you throw only a single jab, leave a ton of space, and then throw another single jab. Instead, fighters need to do feint jabs, double jabs, even triple jabs, change the target on their jab, vary the force on the jab, vary the speed of the jab. Now, to his credit, when Sheeraz felt that sense of urgency in the final championship rounds, the 11th and 12th, he did perform far better. So, in spite of him having a broken hand and feeling that pressure, he was able to put on a better performance in those final 2 rounds. So, I think he knows that, and that begs the question as to why he didn't turn that on earlier in the fight. Now, on the other hand, I felt that Carlos Adames did put on a very good performance. He did exactly what the shorter, stockier fighter would need to do when faced with someone as tall and lanky as Hamzah SHEERAZ. Adames was constantly breaking at the waist, going side to side, feinting with that upper body motion, and feinting his way in to try to land that big overhand right, which he did in some of the early rounds. I felt that SHEERAZ had his feet a little bit too wide apart, whereas Carlos Adames really had good footwork in that he took very small steps to persistently hunt SHEERAZ down. But it was truly that upper body movement and his change-up in rhythm that helped him close distance on SHEERAZ and land solid punches, not only to the body but also to the head. The other thing that Adames did that I really liked was he was constantly changing up the rhythm of his feet and his hands and his upper body movement. That in and of itself is a way of feinting somebody out. The one thing I could critique Adames about a little bit would be that once they closed distance and Hamzah was willing to stand toe-to-toe with him, I felt that Adames could use a little more small shuffle steps to change the angle on the inside and open up the center line for himself. He may have been able to land like a really good body shot straight to an uppercut from that position. Now let's remember that Adames is from the Dominican Republic, which is the other half of the island that is Cuba on the other side. So I feel that there's a lot of influence between Cuban athletes and Dominican athletes from the Dominican Republic in terms of the combat sport. It makes sense because if you're going to have an international training camp, your closest country is right across on the other half of that island. So, for example, I've noticed there's a crossover between judo players from the Dominican Republic. They train with the Cuban team, and I would assume the boxing teams do also. I'm saying all that to say I think it's a good matchup between Carlos Adames and Salas, because Salas, of course, hails from Cuba, and the two would be familiar with each other and each other's training styles and expectations in a training camp, more than likely. Now, I see that on the other hand, SHEERAZ has chosen to part ways with the trainer that brought him through to that World Championship challenge, and SHEERAZ was now going to train with Andy Lee in Ireland. I do think that's a good choice because I did notice that Andy Lee was able to correct some of Joseph Parker's technical flaws and give us a much more improved, rejuvenated Joseph Parker. So hopefully Andy can coach SHEERAZ to break some of those habits I just mentioned and truly establish himself as a world title challenger. He's also chosen to move up to 168, so that brings a whole new set of challenges, quite literally. But I have confidence that Andy Lee as a coach can bring the best out of Hamzah SHEERAZ. Now, in spite of all my criticism here, I do feel that it was a fun fight to watch. If you haven't seen it yet, the full fight is on Turki Al Sheikh's channel. The one final thought I have about that fight is I listened to that fight on Turki Al Sheikh's channel. I'm not sure which feed he used, but I believe Sean Porter was on the commentary team. And I have to say, I did feel that the commentary was highly biased in SHEERAZ's favor. I personally didn't think that was an accurate accounting of the fight. They kept giving SHEERAZ credit. Oh, he's fighting intelligently, this, that, and the other. And it's like, he's throwing single jabs. He's crossing his feet. Tell me how that counts as fighting intelligently. Do you mean he's not stepping in there and brawling? Well, say that, but he was making these very fundamental flaws. So I'm not sure how that counts as fighting intelligently. Finally, I think I saw a video where Carlos Adames was expressing anger that Turki Al-Sheikh was helping Hamzah SHEERAZ in the corner, in the sense that Turki Al-Sheikh in the later rounds went over to Hamzah's corner and told him under no uncertain terms that he was losing the fight on the scorecards. He was selected as the captain of Frank Warren's team. He's been very much the articulate diplomat for Turki Al-Sheikh's promotion, so I can understand Al-Sheikh's bias towards Hamzah. But by all means, Carlos Adames should definitely speak on it, because supposedly the promoter should be in neutral, but we all know that that's never the case. Finally, what are your thoughts on this fight? Who do you think Adames should face next? How do you think SHEERAZ will fare at 168 pounds? Do you think it's a good decision for him to switch trainers to Andy Lee? Let me know your thoughts in the comments.